Hello. I'm going to read what I wrote this morning about God's laws to all of humanity, sometimes referred to as the Noahide Laws or the 7 Laws to Noah. And I'll read that. I was inspired by multiple people, and this process of sharing writing, I would invite you to criticize. I have babies. I have children, so my writing is not my baby. So do not have any fear that you will. It will not feel like you are attacking my baby. If you were to come in my house and attack my baby, that'd be one thing. But attacking this thing that I created this morning will not hurt my feelings at all. But, is there a possibility of us collaborating on things? So here we go. All right, so this is commentary on the Noahide Laws and universal morality. I encounter people who want to talk about the Noahide Laws, also known as the 7 Laws of Noah. Although these people seem to believe that the Noahide Laws offer a foundation for universal morality, I find that they are making statements about morality which I find to be wrong. And so I will attempt to offer up my view in an attempt to contribute towards a universal morality with a humility which would allow me to see where I am wrong. When I first encountered the Noahide Laws, I was interested in the law concerning the establishment of courts for justice. I soon learned that people interested in the Noahide Laws felt this law was the least important of the 7. I suspect that the people who teach the Noahide Laws are unavoidably biased by their identity and their worldview, just as all creatures are. The underlying claim is that these 7 laws of Noah were given from God to Noah for all of humanity. But when I go to Genesis chapter 9, where God speaks to Noah, I do not see any law in the sense that we are told what we should and should not do. What we are taught is something more akin to the word karma or consequences. Every action has a consequence. This is the Noahide Law simply put. There will be consequences. The first Jewish law for all. Many Jews would have you believe that the first law is something along the lines of do not worship the wrong God. If I go to the Chabad website, their summary of the first law is do not profane God's oneness in any way. The website adds color to this first law with acknowledge that there is a single God who cares about what we are doing and desires that we take care of his world. The truth is that there will be consequences. If our lives are centered around the pursuit of wealth, we might attempt to mistreat creatures in pursuit of wealth. There are many other ways we might mistreat creatures in our pursuits, and there will be consequences. To the extent that we can avoid mistreating creatures, we will avoid the consequences of doing so. God tells Noah this explicitly in Genesis chapter 9. I suspect that many Jews believe that a person who expresses profanity towards God would be limited in their capacity to treat creatures as good as possible, and I agree. Did you notice the God G-D in the quotes from the Chabad website? That is their attempt to avoid expressing profanity towards God. And so there are Jews who are very serious about this, and I'm sure there are Muslims who would also tread very carefully here. And I love these people, and God loves these people. But I've come to learn that God loves all people. When I choose to use the word God without the dash instead of God with the dash, I am being deliberate because I believe God loves people who use the word God without the dash. I went a few years using the word God with the dash, but when I decided to practice making Jesus my king, I learned that God even loves those who profane God's oneness. I remember being on the other side where I used the word God with a dash. I believed that God would love me for my righteousness. I would be angry at people who would profane God's oneness by saying that Jesus is God. I would think myself better than those people who would profane God's oneness by saying that Jesus is God. Do I believe Jesus is God? And would my answer somehow cause me to violate God's law and cause me to be punished? And if I said Jesus is God, even though Jesus is not God, would I profane God by claiming that God would punish me? Or if I said Jesus is God, even though Jesus is not God, would I glorify God by claiming that God would glorify me? Do you really know God in your heart and how God would respond to people proclaiming Jesus to be God? Are you afraid that your God would punish you if you said Jesus is God? When I decided to practice making Jesus my king, I did not say Jesus is God, and I have not said that explicitly. But I do see that making Jesus my king has somehow allowed me to know God better and better over time. I can say that my experience can be compared to the fruit tree, which makes use of different kinds of fruit trees being grafted into each other. And so I experience something which feels like being grafted into God as a result of my being grafted into Jesus, to the extent that my skill in making Jesus king increases with practice. We are conditioned by our environment, and our environment includes mathematics. Because of mathematics, we have learned that 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3, and this language of size we call mathematics is very good. But there is always a trade-off. The idea of the Trinity can be perceived in very different ways by very different people. A person conditioned in Islam and Judaism and mathematics and without any skill or knowledge of grafting fruit trees will perceive the Trinity as a profanity against God. But a person who is not conditioned in Islam nor Judaism nor mathematics, and who has skill and knowledge at grafting fruit trees will perceive the Trinity as true, good, and beautiful. Every expression which attempts to share knowledge of God is unavoidably profane. That does not mean that we should abandon our attempts to share good expressions with the intent of sharing our knowledge of God. When we make mistakes, there will be consequences. And when our expressions are very good, there will be consequences. So that's something like the first part. There are 6 other Noahide laws. Yeah, there are 6 other Noahide laws, and I really planned on initially getting into my favorite one, which is establishing courts of justice. But somehow ended up here because, and it's relevant because I keep coming across people who call themselves Noahides who say that Christians who believe in the Trinity are not Noahides because of reasons. And I hope I'm pointing out some reasons that go very deep. Like, what are these 7 laws and where do they come from? Because when I read Genesis chapter 9 and go to the source material, when I ask myself, well, how are these 7 laws mapped onto what God said, then I find that, we are distributing our cognition to people, to humans, creatures, lots of them, including those who taught us mathematics and who have shaped us in our environment, including those who created cars and airplanes. And there's no way out of the fact that we've been conditioned by people. So, but we can try to put ourselves in that story where Noah and his family and those creatures were delivered from a terrible event. And God said a few things, and God made a covenant, and the sign is the rainbow. And so I don't trust. I am not a trusting person. And so I attempt to have a direct relationship with God. And I've been doing that for a long time. And yeah, this practice of making Jesus king has helped. And what has been revealed is that, God loves the sinners. God loves the sinners, and God will use the sinners, and those sinners will be lifted up the highest. And so maybe a lot of Christians are doing profanity, and God loves them and will lift them up the highest, because God loves everyone. And so the hard part about that is, if you are someone who has made the sacrifice and has lived righteously and, looked down on the sinner who does not make those sacrifices and live righteously, it's a hard pill to swallow that God would. It feels like God loves the sinner more than God loves those who are the most righteous. And then Hosea 6:6, Hosea 6:6 for people who don't like the New Testament, and then it's a couple times in the book of Matthew, is the importance of mercy more so than sacrifice. And so, what's interesting is, as we come to know God better, we also become transformed and become more like God, including becoming someone who loves the sinners more than the righteous and has mercy. The interesting thing is that mercy actually requires more effort than those sacrifices. It is harder for the person who has made many sacrifices for a long time, living seriously and righteously. It is harder for that person to get into heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. It is harder. It is very hard for that person to have mercy for those who have not put in that effort. So the effort required in having mercy for the sinner is actually more than all of that effort that that we have put in attempting to be righteous. So I don't know if you'll be able to put in that level of effort and to essentially, it feels like, I don't think it's true, but it feels like throwing away, that all the sacrifice and all the righteousness and effort you put forth are no good. That's what it feels like whenever you then have mercy for the one who did not put in all that effort and make all those sacrifices. But this is the way of my King, and it seems this is the way of God. So right now what I'm seeing is there's only one Noahide law. There's not 7. And that one Noahide law is, there will be consequences. And that's beautiful, because then we get to judge by the fruit